Should we get going? Okay, me kara kia tātou. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, haumie huie, tai hie. So welcome along to our last Transport Committee meeting of the year. Been a big year. Just before we start, just wanted to formally welcome two new managers on the team, Lisa Rossiter and Paul Tufford. I think this is your first actual formal meeting, so welcome along. Great to have you. I know we've been introduced in other settings, but just to give you a formal welcome, great to have you. So we'll go to item number 1, which is apologies, and I have an apology for lateness from Councillor Lee and an apology for lateness from Councillor Ropata, who will be joining online, and then we have Councillor Gaylor, who's online. So just those apologies for lateness. Someone keen to move those? Councillor Staples, second. Councillor Saw. Those in favour? Those against? That's passed. Thank you. Welcome. So item 2, any conflicts of interest to declare? See none. That's that. Thank you. Item 3, public participation. I don't have any on my paper. So unless there's any in the room or on the line, that's fine. So that's done. Item 4 is confirmation of our minutes, our public minutes from last meeting on the 24th of October. Someone happy to move those? Councillor Laban, Councillor Duffy, all those in favour? Those against? That's passed. So, into the real business. We're going to have an update now from one of our operators, Transurban. So Renee, I think, is here. Renee Snellgrove. So please, coming up from Transurban. Thank you for coming in. And we're in your hands. Yes, indeed.
Thank you. I'll just get myself sorted. Oh, Moreno koutou, perhaps just while Renee's getting her notes there. This is part of the regular series of enabling councillors to have engagement with our operators. So Renee is the head of legal and HR from the Transit group of companies, and of course one of our critical bus operators through the Transurban network. So absolute pleasure to have you with us, Renee, this morning to give us an overview of your issues and operations and a bit of an opportunity for some kōrero with our councillors. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to provide you with a brief overview of what we've been doing for the last 20 months. I think the last time I was here was in March 2023, and obviously the main focus at the time was overcoming the driver shortage that we were facing here in Wellington and other places in New Zealand, and also from that moving towards stabilising the Metlink bus network and our part that we play in that. So we have largely achieved both those things, and so I'll just run through some of the work that's been undertaken that might be of interest to you. So to overcome the driver shortage over the last 2 years, we've recruited over 100 drivers, and that was between January and November of 2023. 40% of those came to us on work visas, and 60% were recruited locally. And of those on work visas, 82% of those will expire in 2026. So we'll be working on a plan next year to either support them to gain their residency or to replace them via local recruitment. We've provided annual increases to the drivers in line with indexation. That's to continue to attract and retain our workforce. Obviously the market is competitive, although it's just changing at the moment. This was a requirement to pass on indexation increases. That was a requirement under those wage funding uplifts. However, it's something that Transurban and Transit have been doing for the best part of 15 years. So it was just a continuation of that for us. We've bolstered our FTE driver numbers. So pre-COVID and post-COVID look very different for us, as do pre-increased sick leave entitlement and post-increased sick leave entitlement. So that has required us to not just employ 27, which was our pre-everything needs. We now require 44 drivers, so that's an extra 17 drivers on top, just to cover that additional sick leave entitlement. And just for perspective, that's an additional $1.4 million in wages per year. And I just note there that our total wage cost operates our portion of the network across all the roles required is very much out of proportion with what we're currently funded to provide. So it's just a very important note and something that is very impactful for us. Continued with our recruitment efforts throughout 2024. So we now firmly return to BAU levels with good interest locally, and retention of our workforce is strong. Being short 100 drivers was a very big number, and I've asked myself a number of times, how did we get to that position? Some of the things that contributed to that was the introduction of the ERA rest and meal breaks. That required us to employ an additional 35 plus FTE drivers, just to enable us to schedule those breaks in line with that legislation. And that happened right as COVID was impacting us. And we also needed to obviously increase our ASL cover, so it was an extra 17 to 20 drivers. And then through COVID, very little recruitment was able to be undertaken. We weren't able to attract people to frontline service roles during the pandemic. Our borders were closed. The pay rates at the time were not attracting local interest, so that has all turned around now, which is great. We've invested in our frontline supervisors. We've undertaken a series of leadership courses this year. We recognise the importance that the people leadership layer has on our employee engagement and the retention of our people, so it's very important to us. And 74% of our drivers across the region have completed customer experience and situational awareness training, so otherwise known as de-escalation training. And this training covers everything from first impressions through to the importance of our team values and our culture that we have in our workplace and what we expect from our drivers, how best to handle repetitive questions, which they would get on a daily, and then right through to understanding the causes of conflict, differences between threatening behaviour, aggression and assault, all things that they have to face on a daily basis. So this training is now incorporated into the onboarding of all our new drivers, so just the remaining drivers that we have will continue that through early 2025. We're measuring our employee net promoter score, so it's something new that we've been doing this year through engagement surveys and listening to that feedback from our teams on what we can be doing better to make the role and our workplace more appealing. And the above efforts have resulted, as I say, in strong retention and low turnover, so that's good. Our workforce has stabilised and we've got a steady flow of applicants in the pipeline. And what are we doing to maintain that stable workforce? Our priorities will continue to be recruit locally through targeted recruitment campaigns that lift the profile of bus driving, and we've had some support from Greater Wellington to do that, which is very helpful. We'll uphold our employer brands, our reputation through good industrial relations, which we do have with our unions down here and our staff. Favourable and competitive terms and conditions, and that's just not about pay, that's about our rosters, our shifts, the way we treat people, good workplace culture and shared values, which is important to us, and we'll continue to provide ongoing training and development opportunities, which I have spoken about and we'll touch on shortly. And obviously we'll continue to upskill our frontline supervisors because they make or break our people's day, and we'll be addressing issues early like we always do, although some issues have been taking a little bit longer to solve than others, and we'll be monitoring and lobbying for immigration settings that remain or at least allow those settings to pivot quickly should offshore recruitment be required for our industry. So some of the steps we've taken to reduce cancellations and increase our reliability and stabilise our part of the network is all of the above, so stabilising our workforce. We've been building our internal BI reporting, which everyone's playing in that space nowadays, but it's the future. It's highlighting our performance weak points as they're occurring, so in real time, or as real time as we can get, which is allowing us to focus our efforts on our internal processes to address those specific issues. And during 2025, we'll be working through what we're calling Project Bedrock, and that's a large piece of work mapping out every policy, plan, process and procedure across our operations to improve our efficiency, productivity, our quality control, change management, and onboarding. It sounds very big, but it's an exciting piece of work. I think we're good with process, but as soon as process is put on paper, it's old. And so it's just how we put a framework in place to manage that change and getting our people up to speed when they join us. So we've recruited hard across our workshops as well. Not only did our industry face a driver shortage, but we also faced a qualified mechanic shortage. The cause of our cancellations swinging from driver shortage to vehicle shortage. We're now at 90% FTE across our workshops, which enables us to ensure our fleet is turned around quickly and there is no impact to our service delivery. Still working on that in the Wellington region, but that is looking good moving forward. Our performance across the network has largely stabilised, with cancellations across Wellington reducing to single digits in November. So I see the data that's presented to you today. It's still up in the sort of the 30s for Wellington, which is not good to see for October, but that should, you'll see in November that that's down in the single digits, which it hasn't been for some time, and it's something that's taken us a long time to get to. We're very proud that we're there, and that's where we want to maintain that moving forward. It's been a significant effort in resource, time and spend over quite a long period of time, and it's great to see that bus passenger boardings are back at pre-COVID levels and reliability at 99.6%. So I think bus operators have done a good job to get the network back there. Looking forward to the year ahead, we've rolled out our new e-road vehicle management platform across our fleet. So that's going to help our driving team to, monitor their driving behaviour when they're out on the road. There's a little device on the dash there that tells the driver when they're speeding, or a series of other things like harsh braking, etc., or for a smoother ride for the passenger. And our two initial key focus areas are reducing our speeding and our excessive idling. It's quite horrific just how much carbon can come out from just buses sitting there idling and not going anywhere. So we'll be focusing our driver training next year on SAFED, which is reducing our fuel consumption across our diesel fleet. Tail swings, they're a real problem here in Wellington. Work time rules, managing driver fatigue, customer service continuation, and obviously getting the remaining drivers through that situational awareness training. We'll be working through the bike rack compliance issue, obtaining assurance from our regulators that our fleet of vehicles is compliant before reintroducing the racks back into service. We'll be engaging with our friends at council on upcoming procurement, on transferring assets that we have, potentially new transferring assets, closing out outstanding contract variations, and some timetable reviews next year. And we'll be continuing to improve our operational performance, meeting those reliability and punctuality KPIs. So that's my 10 minutes. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to update you on what we've been doing.
Thank you so much, Renee. And it is, like you said at the beginning, a very different environment from when you last came in the beginning of 2023. So, yeah, really, really congratulations from us on the results in the last year, especially. It's brilliant to see. So I've got Councillor Lee and then Councillor Ponta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Renee, for coming in. I know you've achieved a huge amount of work in the last 12, 18 months. And I know you have quite a good pastoral care program for your migrant bus drivers. What are the concerns coming out? I mean, there must be a few just being displaced from family or just coming in from overseas.
That's a great question. I would not want to answer that without having asked first. Yeah, so nothing has been raised to me as being a concern. They've integrated well into our team. As I said, next year from March, we'll be engaging with them to determine what their desires are for when their visas expire. Some have renewed their visas already. They've managed to get extensions, ones that were here earlier. So we're working with them, and if they want to stay and we can support them, then that is preferred. And if they leave, then obviously we'll have to prepare for their vacancy, and we'll be doing that well in advance. So it's just a matter of finding out. And I think there's 44 across the Wellington region, so there'll be a bit of engagement going on in March next year.
And just one last question: do you know of any other bus operators also picking up on this very good initiative of pastoral care?
I can't speak for what the other operators have done. All I can say is that our team have most certainly gone above and beyond to settle these people in Wellington. It's not the warmest of climates from where they've come from. It's been a big adjustment, but they've certainly integrated into the team, and they're just yeah, they're not. I wouldn't be able to walk around and say that one's on a visa.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next is Councillor Ponta and then Councillor Duffy. Morning, Renee.
Morning.
Let's take you back to the driver shortage issue. So recognise the big effort that you took to get drivers from overseas onto the network. But how can, apart from the fact that you are working with drivers to secure residency and what have you, so that they can continue, in relation to the settings, the immigration settings that the government has now, any likelihood that we're going to walk into the same problems that we did 3 years ago?
Okay, as the settings stand at the moment, my understanding is that those that came in on the visas that applied under the previous terms will still be able to, I guess, take those terms up. They still apply. It was only people who applied for visas after a certain date, and we don't have any of them in our team. And we've not employed anyone on a visa since, I think the last one was August last year. So the terms were still the same. So I don't see an impact from the current terms being different to the ones that they were brought in under. But if they do change again, and that door is closed to us, then that will be a very real risk.
So, sorry, can I just ask that in a slightly different way then? If we get to a point where we start to see some strain in terms of the driver numbers on the network, in other words, the number of drivers starts to go down again, are the immigration settings as they are now as generous to you as they were 2 or 3 years ago to bring new drivers on? Are we going to have a battle with the government to open those settings up again?
Okay. They're not as favourable to the individual coming, but we will still be able to bring them in under the current terms.
Okay.
Yeah.
2 more questions. You mentioned the de-escalation training.
Yes.
Can you step me through? Somebody gets on a bus, there's a bit of hate speech going on, somebody's nutting off at another passenger or a driver or what have you. What happens in those situations in relation to the response, particularly from the driver, communication with his control centre, and any communication with the police?
Okay. So what would happen, and what I'd like to think is happening, would be that that driver has obviously done our situational awareness training. They're not going to escalate the situation. They're not going to get involved if it looks like it's going to calm down on its own. I think stopping the vehicle, obviously, not continuing driving, allowing passengers to exit, opening up the red door. I think my personal concern is that the passengers that are behind the door that's open can't exit the bus if they should need to. So effectively it would be stopping, it would be calling panic button, calling comms if need be, and escalating it to whatever point it needs to be escalated to, whether that's police being called.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the last question is tail swing.
Yep.
You raised it. I understand it's an issue in Wellington, seen several instances of it myself. So what is the answer? You've got a certain set of buses and what have you, some are longer than others, got very constrained streets. Where do the answers around tail swing lie?
Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, I would say infrastructure. Yep, making sure that the bus stops that they're pulling into are able to accommodate their length, and obviously the way that they pull in and pull out of a stop. Training, obviously, there is a better way to do it, and also it would be most certainly the size of the vehicle. So we have very few tail swing incidents in the shorter double decks, the EVs, the first gen EVs, than we do, say, the double deck diesels. Much longer overhang, so that's just by its very nature. There's less to hit. So, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Training is a big one, so
Sorry, just on that, what about the when in 2018, when new vehicles started arriving on the fleet and we redesigned the network, there were quite a number of poles by bus stops that had the chevrons put on them to alert the drivers to the fact that they could hit those posts with the back of their buses. Is there a program in place by presumably either the power company or Wellington City Council to step those back at all?
not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I'm not the subject matter expert in my team on that. I can ask what the discussions have been to date. Just on your previous question, Darren, the other thing that would help, well, I don't know if it would help, but the other thing that impacts tail swings is the pressure that the drivers feel to keep the timetable. So they're not, a charter driver can go backwards and forwards to get the perfect fit. A driver has to pull in very quickly and pull out very quickly because they've got a time to keep to. So that does add a lot of pressure and anxiety on a driver. Yeah, okay. Just adding that to that. But I can find out in terms of what conversations have been had with those companies.
Cool, thank you. That's good. Very good, thank you, Councillor Duffy.
Morning, everyone. Kia ora, Renee. Bus patronage is increasing, and that's leading to capacity constraints, so full buses and so on. What's the perspective from you as an operator and from the drivers of the impacts of buses being fuller and drivers not being able to let more passengers on in situations? Is it becoming apparent that that's increasing, and are there any implications of that are problematic?
I feel like I should have brought one of my drivers with me. That would have been good. Okay, so great question. I don't know what I wouldn't answer for our drivers. What I would like to see is that in the position that I'm in, is I'd like to see more data. I'd like to see passenger loadings by route number at different types of the day, and where we're having those issues as they're happening, not several months later or et cetera, et cetera. It would be so that we can, because we can respond to capacity, but the drivers seeing what they're seeing, it's only as good as the drivers feeding it back to our operations teams, and our operations teams having the ability to back that up with data before responding operationally. So for me, it would be, where are the hotspots? Yeah, and what are we doing about that? We do have a number of routes where, we've got a lot of ability to move our fleet around within limitations, obviously, but data is what we need. We need access to better data.
And Mr. Chair, I wonder if it'd be useful for us as a committee to have a metric of the increase in capacity constraint over time, because it will become more acute. I don't know what that metric exactly looks like, but the routes or the number of buses that are reaching capacity for that bus, not from the sense of how to manage it as an operator, but just from a sense of how big is this problem? Is it accelerating? Is that something?
Yes,
that
I agree. I have seen some time ago a little set of tables of bus loadings by route. So I know that exists, but like you say, Renee, it might not be getting out to you in time to be useful to react in a kind of dynamic way. But I think we have been doing a lot of work on the data side, so we'll take a note on bus loadings, capacity by route, and making sure that what we can share as soon as we can. We'll try to get that through to you and other operators, and to share around as well, because that's a useful point. This is awesome. Really good to have you here, Councillor Lavin.
I think it's a question. Was that the question? Well, just on that subject, so I bus to the Hikoi on Tuesday. So I bus from Wainui to Waterloo. The bus was packed, and I've been on that bus for years. And the train equally, with the record numbers of trips last week. It was full, but everybody coped. And then I did the same route coming back. So at the risk of sounding ignorant, how big of a problem is us having routes where there's not enough room or not enough capacity? Because I thought, based on our learnings from last week, I thought the bus and train service was fantastic, very efficient, and with record numbers on the day.
Well, I think others might have more detailed answers, but I think we probably don't want to do that sort of a day every day. It was quite a challenge with that many numbers. 160,000 trips in a day is probably right at the limit of what we can cope with. So, and I think it is probably a route specific thing. So we know, like the Route 2, for example, there are certainly capacity issues there that we're addressing through the articulated vehicles. But yeah, I think it's a good question, and maybe we can come back with some data on that as well. Other questions? We satisfied? Very good. Hey, thanks, Renee. Really good to see you. Thanks for making time and for all the good work. And please pass on our thanks and acknowledgements to all your team and all the drivers and mechanics and so on. So thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, next is item 6, which is an update on action items from previous meetings. So, Sam, over to you.
Thank you, kia ora, tātou. This report just runs through where we're at with the actions, particular things. I'm just going to take it as read, but updates for this meeting. The emerging trends in transport is on the agenda for today. We have an RTI 2.0 update in the workshop following this meeting. We are still UTP engagement plan, so dates will be provided to you when we've got that through. We have had the meeting with people at Maymorn Station, and we've sent some information regarding disposal of batteries. We're working towards the Tawa fixed route, which we're working towards doing that probably on the basis set out in the report, but we are engaging with the community as we discussed at the last committee meeting. It might be that the services are based on our original plans, and then we will look to amend it as after it's introduced, just in order that we can do the work that's needed to get something running. So that's where we're at with that. Just wanted to note in relation to the electric articulated vehicles item, in the report it says that they'll be in service in mid-2025. It's actually mid-2026. So couldn't suddenly shorten the procurement timeframes for those vehicles, unfortunately. Unplanned BRT, you've got a document that's been circulated today which provides the information about how the unplanned BRT has been provided over the last, during October, and the update on the bus stops has been completed.
Thanks, Sam. Well, you've already answered one of my questions. So, Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. First, just thank you to staff for the response to the bus shelters in Taita and Wainuiomata. Thank you very much. On the item around the rail network performance funding challenges, it says service reductions based on temporary speed restriction forecast modelling has taken place. Was that provided in earlier papers to us around the implications of that, or is that something that could be shared with the committee at some point, as to get a sense, I guess, of, even though there's still details to be worked out, what are the scale and nature of the speed restrictions and service interruptions we're looking at seeing?
I'll pass over to Fiona to answer that.
Kia ora koutou. The initial impact of the speed restrictions was shown in an earlier presentation around what that would mean by each line, if you recall. We're still chasing KiwiRail to provide us with the speed restrictions that they would preemptively apply to the network if funding is not received. So we'll have a little bit more information once we've got some understanding of what's in the ARNIP, and also to the investment business case that they've put together would be the subject of a budget bid for 25, we think, but all of that's very confidential as well. So as soon as we know something a little bit more definitive, we will come to this committee and let you know.
Councillor Conley?
Two questions from me, and they kind of have a weird overlap, actually. So the first question is around Mayborn. So yes, we did have a really useful session one very cold morning in Mayborn, meeting the people that were both catching and getting off the train, and that was useful. One of the things that was raised there was safety concerns about the temporary bus stop, not so much on the way from the Wairarapa to Wellington, but on the way from Wellington back to the Wairarapa, the bus has to stop basically on the side of the road, and people have to gun it across State Highway 2. Not great. So I'm wondering if we can have some feedback on that issue. Also, an issue that came out of that meeting was the fact that Wairarapa commuters currently don't get charged for bus replacements because the bus is not enabled with Snapper. Now, in some ways, I think that's quite a fair deal, given that having to catch the bus from the Wairarapa is quite unpleasant, and a free trip might be the least we can do. But I emailed about, was that something we could go out and say, your buses will be replaced, trains will be replaced with buses, but there's going to be no cost to them. I got a message coming back saying we're doing everything we can to look at charging options. I just am really keen that we expedite that decision, because one way or the other, people need to know, and at the moment there's an expectation that when trains are replaced with buses, those buses will be free. And if we go and change that, we're going to have another public comms thing on our hands, on top of the fact that we're replacing buses for a large part of the summer. So if we could just make that decision really soon, so that we can go out and either tell people your buses will continue to be free, or no, we've implemented a solution that allows us to charge for them.
Should we take that one?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, in answer to the second question, so we are working on that. In the current environment, we are becoming more and more focused on revenue. So we are looking at options for a payment, but we're still bottoming that out. So, but yes, we do need to make a call so we can communicate it. So we'll keep you posted about that. In terms of the State Highway 2 bus stop, I think we'd need to come back about what options there might be, if there are options to look at that at Mayborn.
So definitely there was a feeling that that exactly where it stopped was not the best point for having people crossing the state highway, and that there was no visibility for cars coming. So again, it's the very, very end of December. These changes are going to come in December. I'm just really anxious that these two issues are resolved in the next week or so. We've known that this is coming for a really long time, and I have been raising the issues around Mayborn, so we need to resolve that really, really quickly so we can give people some comfort. The other issue was the bus replacement data that we have. This is really interesting, but it's not quite the information that I thought I was going to be getting. In that the reason that I asked the question was, again, around buses that weren't Snapper enabled and buses that were continuing to not have cycle capability. Now, at the moment, no buses have cycle capability, so that's a bit of a red herring. But this doesn't tell us that. So this is really useful, and we can see which buses are part of the part of the network, and which buses aren't. But it doesn't actually tell us how many buses we have operating that aren't meeting those conditions that we set for bus replacements.
Sure. So just by way of further explanation, I guess the Metlink operated buses are obviously have the Metlink livery and all the equipment. NCS do have Snapper and bike racks. The other providers don't. So that's, you can interpret that. We could provide an updated version of that that's clear about that.
Yeah, just adjust that table.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. We've noted those points. Thanks, Councillor Connolly. Councillor Potter?
Can I just ask on that then, which of these operators in this list don't have Snapper?
So if you look at the table on the bottom, at the bottom, which has got the summary. So it said capital shuttles don't, Rambler doesn't, and
So
Yeah.
my supplementary question is, why are we using these operators?
because this is for unplanned bus replacements where there is no our current operators don't have capacity to provide them. So this is when things happen at short notice, and the philosophy is that it's better to have a bus to enable people to travel rather than not having one at all.
So what plans are in place to get Snapper onto these vehicles?
So we've got a whole project looking at BRT, and we'll be talking a bit about that in the workshop this afternoon, as to what that might look like in the future.
So can I come back to Councillor Connolly's question about the Wairarapa line? Most of those bus replacements are not for emergency situations. They'll be for blocks of line and what have you.
Not always.
No, but okay, perhaps not always, but irrespective of that, the primary provider for those services on the Wairarapa line, the capital shuttles crops in here once or twice, but mainly it's Transit Masterton, who are our provider in the Wairarapa and should have snapper machines on their buses. And I can't understand why we're losing the revenue and who's filling the gap.
So often those Wairarapa replacements that go over the Remataka Hill are provided by a coach, and the coaches don't have snapper. So, and the reason for that is for comfort of the passengers. So we're looking at this whole picture at the moment, and we can have a further discussion, more detailed discussion.
Yeah, but what I don't understand, Sam, is that this has been a perennial problem. It's like we had the block of line and the Wairarapa. They just went on and on for 2, 3, 4 years, and now it's becoming evident that people are travelling free of charge. Which, as much as I like that, we've actually we are having to face the fact that we are a little bit of a sieve in some areas, and we need more revenue.
Yes, hence we are looking at it.
Yeah, the whole bus replacement thing is problematic. I mean, I'm fed up of dealing with bus replacement questions and issues. It started with bike racks, but it just seems to go on from one thing to another. We're absolutely terrible at it. And I know it's not us. I know it's the train operators who are supposed to do these things, but it all comes under the Metlink brand, and this is precisely the stuff that Mayor Brown in Auckland gets pissed off with. I'm the mayor, but I don't have any control. We're the councillors, we're the ones who get it in the neck, but we don't seem to have any control over the situation. It's got to change. I'm just fed up of it.
Yeah, I think just on maybe on behalf of the Metlink folks, we do feel the pain of bus replacements and feel the pressure of dealing with it. I said to Paul, our new manager of operations, that being the new guy, he could come in and solve the bus replacement problem. So no pressure, but no, seriously, we are quite. I think in the new year when we come back, this will be really high on our agenda. I mean, obviously we've got a big summer ahead of us with lots of bus replacements, and it is going to be suboptimal because there just hasn't really been the work that we needed to do able to have been done in time. But we will do the best we can over the summer, and we will come back in the new year with a proper plan. But yeah, I mean, I think we should acknowledge that. Is there anything else to say on that particular topic? We are going to talk more about bus replacements this afternoon.
Just could I have a time frame for when those two issues are going to be reported back to me, given that this is our last meeting and it would be easy for everyone to disappear into their summer holidays without resolving these two issues?
Well, I think we can get you some communications, hopefully before the block of line starts.
We'll have to. We have to make a decision within the next week.
Okay, so within a week we'll get you something.
Yeah.
Okay, what is next? Anything else on the action items. We've added a few action items, so the list keeps expanding. Anything else? Okay, that's good. So that's item 6. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, team. Should we do another item and then see how far we can get? Okay, so item 7 is safety on board. This has been quite a topical matter. So we've got a team coming up. We've got Emmett and David and Paul. So coming up, and we are in your hands. And thanks for the paper. And I know there's a number of questions here. Some have been circulated in advance to the team, so we'll work our way through this item. And so thanks, team. Who's going to kick off?
That's working? Yeah. Morning all. This report responds to a request made at the previous meeting for an update of actions taken to manage safety on board MetLink PT. Just before I suppose we get into the report, just want to acknowledge the recent safety and serious incidents on board PT, both in Wellington and across the country. MetLink takes the safety of its passengers, drivers and staff seriously and are actively looking at ways of making improvements in this area. I just also want to acknowledge the comments made by Renee this morning, and applaud her that she's got through 75% of her team through the de-escalation training, and that is now part of their inductions. Are there any questions?
Yeah, so Mr. Lenson, you're first with the flag up. And I think Councillor Ponta, should I put you on the list? I have a long list. You have a long list? Okay. Yeah, okay. I mean, also happy for you if you want to just read them into the record for people's public interest, and then we can come back to them later. But we'll go Mr. Lenson first, and then Councillor Ponta.
Well, thank you. Just reading the report, it looks like in Wellington the numbers are generally down in terms of aggressive behaviour, but then a lot of the reporting around the country is that it's on the rise. Is there any sort of insight into whether that's the actual pattern or whether Wellington's unique or what's going on? Why there's that discrepancy?
We get reporting from both our operators and what we see through our CRM system as well, through Resolve. In June of this year, we started to code aggressive behaviour as a separate code. I think we've done since June. There's been 4,000 customer feedback pieces, and out of that I think there was 19 that related to passenger behaviour issues on board. Did that answer the question?
Not really. I'm wondering about the difference between what we're seeing reported in Auckland and Canterbury, where they're saying it's increasing, whereas in Wellington the data you've presented and your analysis says it seems to be decreasing.
Yeah.
And whether that's why there's a difference there.
Okay.
Through the chair, there's no definitive view on that, but one way of identifying that would be looking at the demographic profile of our customers, and one theory that might sit behind that is that there's very high use of public transport with a working population rather than off-peak travel.
Councillor Duthie, did you have a comment to make on that? We'll come to you.
Thank you. Just a quick comment on that. Looking at the graph and data presented there, and I think acknowledging that we only have that about 8 months of data, so we actually don't have a sense of trend as to what it was compared to last year. So I think it's actually too early to conclude that it's decreasing. It's variable across the year, depending on school cycles and weather and seasons and so on. I think so. It would take a couple of years of time series to actually see a trend there. be my comment.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it is a relatively new metric, a more specific metric that we're calculating. But I do get the sense overall that it's probably not quite as much of a problem in Wellington as in Auckland. But Sam?
Yeah, if I just add through, Chair, we do understand from our operators and the operators who operate nationally that in Wellington, as David said, we don't have the same number of incidents, and that in Auckland and Christchurch it is more of a feature of the network.
So I've got. Oh, do you want to come back on that one? Okay, well, we'll put you on the list. So I've got Councillor Ponta, Councillor Staples, Councillor Saw, Councillor Duffy. Do you want to go in that order? Yeah.
Well, what I can do is break it up, if you like. And, yeah. So before I get to the questions that I'd already posed in an email, just from the last question that was posed, could we say that we had standardised reporting across the country for incidents that happen on the public transport network? Yeah. So if I look at stats from Canterbury, am I looking at the same reporting basis as stats for Wellington or Auckland or Tauranga?
No.
I would say there's one indicator that might be given that the passenger satisfaction survey is an NZTA requirement. So the question around perceptions of safety on board could be used as a comparative indicator from the surveys from ECAN and AT.
So sort of partially a question, but really, well, it is a prompt as much as anything else. I just wonder whether we can continue to go forward without having a standardised reporting system, one, across the country, but also two, a system that uses the same reporting standards that the police have, recognising that even the police reporting system may need to be improved. I just can't understand how. I mean, I know that we are very much just focused on what happens within our little silo, but when we're investing in something like national ticketing system, which is a national system, how can we continue to think of reporting on that basis? That I can't, the minister can't, nobody can say, well, these figures are markedly different in Canterbury from Wellington, and here is the rationale for it, as opposed to us going, well, they collect that information on a different basis. There are only 2 reporting codes in Canterbury, and there are 5 in Wellington. Anyway. To my questions, I suppose what the first question I had was how confident we are in incident reporting and the extent to which there may be underreporting on the network. Lots of people who see things, hear things, are confronted by things, but don't actually report it. What do we know about that side of things?
I think that there's certainly some work to do in that space. The operators currently are contracted only to report on notifiable events. So if an incident was diffused through their de-escalation training by the driver, it's probably not reported.
Right. And so how are we ever going to know about the levels of underreporting? I mean, there is some sort of piece of work that happens every now and then where you interrogate drivers or whatever, and you actually get down to some of those numbers?
Through you, Chair. Look, I think there's and this is a worldwide problem, and one of the things that we have to acknowledge, of course, is that data is only as good as the inputs that humans make into it, and humans have different sort of norms, different standards based on a whole variety of things, and we will always get unevenness of information simply because people will choose to see an incident that some of us would regard as serious as not so serious. I mean, it's just very, very different standards. And I think, Darren, this sort of applies to some of the reporting. What some people say see as offensive, other people do not. What some people choose to report, others do not. And there is this simple factor that we actually simply have to live with, is that the inputs we will get from data will always be uneven because of these different standards around the place. So I think that just needs to be acknowledged when we're considering this point.
Okay. So last question for the moment, which is in two parts. One, how is hate speech recorded within your incident reporting, and how does the recording of hate speech align to the way in which police record or don't record hate speech?
I don't think there's the police codes don't relate to Metlink's codes, and more because we're looking at customer feedback versus criminal offence. It's not to say that we can't put that as a code, so we can add that as a code in the CRM.
So the reason I asked that question is because I asked Renee earlier the question about, well, what happens on a bus if you have an incident. Now, an incident is of sufficient significance that a driver then either presses the panic button, stops the bus, but ultimately maybe calls through to his or her comm centre, and a call may then go through to the police for an intervention. If we haven't adequately recorded the severity or significance of that event, how do we ensure that that event isn't going to fall through the cracks within the police system? Oh, it's just a guy nutting off, or it's just this, or it's just that, as opposed to actually it's a serious incident of hate speech. I just can't understand how we have an incident reporting system on a public transport system that doesn't align to the police system in some way. I know that there maybe you conceive of them as for different purposes, but in their most extreme, they must have to align. A guy has stabbed somebody on a bus. How does that register with the police? Surely that is then a severe incident, and it immediately triggers them to get a squad car there and what have you. I'm struggling.
There is through you, Chair, there is a category difference here, and I think we have to accept that, violence against the person is a category different to speech types that, yes, have different codes of law associated with them, but can be interpreted in different ways. And I think when we're looking at the policing of speech, it is just very problematic and different because people hear and interpret different things. And what we have is we have measures in place about recording disturbances or verbally interfering with passengers, and that's a fair catch-all, I think. But to actually be able to hone in on this specific speech-related crime that has the will be very, very difficult. And police forces all around the world are actually tackling this now. We know it's a very public topic, that the subjectivity and the difficulty of policing this. And, we should recognise that violences against the person are a category difference, and, they shouldn't be really included in the same.
Yeah, I don't take any issue with the fact that it's difficult. My concern is that on our public transport system, we are not in a situation where we are effectively enabling some of these things to happen. And I know that that's not the way that you view this, but if we don't have systems and processes in place that actually clamp down on this sort of behaviour, are we enabling it? And again, I know that none of you approach this on that basis because none of us want to be enabling it, but I just wonder whether our systems and processes are adequately watertight to prevent as many instances as we really can. I think Sam, you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thanks. Generally speaking, in terms of reporting and the way that things flow through, as compared, what we have in our systems and what we require operators to report to us, we're looking at that whole picture in terms of preparation for our new bus contracts. So that is an active piece of work in that frame. In terms of behaviour that might be criminal in nature happening on a bus, there is a responsibility of the operators to deal with that appropriately. And for us, we do have a role in terms of, I guess, setting standards to an extent in the way that we articulate things in our contracts and sometimes in terms of what we require to be reported. At the moment, we don't require specific reporting. That's not in our contract, so it is something we are actively looking at in terms of are there things we need to do to better align with other requirements, and how can we make sure that we've got the best data that we can get around these types of things. And bearing in mind that in terms of things where we're relying on members of the public to report things, there will be different thresholds in which any individual person will have around that. So yeah, we're certainly in terms of the matters of aggression and that kind of thing, we're definitely looking at how we can capture that information better, but it ultimately does depend on the reporting through.
Just to say, I think we can come back with a response on actions we can take to prevent hate speech on board our public transport network. So we can do that. Councillor Potter, do you want? Are you? Okay. Yep. So, Councillor Staples.
I think it's been covered by the discussion, because I'm just wondering how much of a rabbit hole we're going down, and any incident is one incident too many. However, it's a bit like deaths on road. You know, you can't legislate or whatever against some people, and I just think we might be going down too much of a rabbit hole.
Thank you, Councillor Saul.
Thank you for this. Just a couple of questions picking up on this discussion. Hopefully this isn't a rabbit hole, but you were just mentioning about we only hear about the notifiable offences. Do the operators collect any data or any trends on near misses or things that nearly get to that threshold? Because I think that could be quite a useful indicator, even if it's not notifiable. What are the things that nearly seem like they're bubbling up? Is there any? Do we have that capability at all?
Through the chair, I'm sure that all of our operators would have an incident reporting system where they're recording near misses. There's a very good opportunity that we ask to see some of that information. I think next on the 5th of December, Metlink's leading a health and safety operator forum to cover off and share and explore, especially safety on transport, how we can do this better, collective ideas, and I think the points raised today could probably be raised there on how we get clearer reporting on all incidents, so that we can collectively make a better decision.
Yeah, because it'd be useful to know some of the things that perhaps don't meet the threshold, but there are things that drivers or that operators are aware of. And I just sort of want to re-emphasise the point of us trying to be proactive here. And while we may not have a lot of legal powers, or there might be other things that prevent us from being more proactive, I think the main point here is we want to create a culture where people feel safe. And we want to get it before something bad happens and we're having to react to something. So I just wanted to emphasise that. And then my other, I think there's an element that was in Councillor Ponta's email of what is the sort of behaviour change and kind of wider social messaging we can do as a public campaign, because it's happening for our rangers, it's happening for other frontline workers or front public-facing workers in local government as well. So I think the Metlink part is part of a bigger public awareness campaign to just look after one another. So just want to flag that. And then my next question was about paragraph 23, about the conditions that explicitly state passenger conduct. And I just wanted to understand how that discretion is exercised and or delegated. So who makes the call? And I guess that also captures your email as well, Councillor Ponter, on what are we thinking about the people that we kick off, who get booted off and how do they get home. But maybe that can be covered in that email or written response, but just wanted to understand that how the discretion is exercised.
Through you, Chair. So we developed the conditions of carriage, and it's an ongoing iterative process, so we review them quite frequently. We've had about 10 reviews in the past 4 years. We do interact with the, obviously with the operators and consult with the operators as we're going through those review processes. But largely the enforcement, the interpretation of those rules will be based on discussions between us and the operators. Obviously they have staff forums where they interpret, they monitor situations themselves and apply those rules in a relatively consistent fashion themselves. But it will differ from driver to driver, and simply based on, again, their norms, their tolerances, what particular day they're having, for example. So we are not there every day to.
I understand that, but I can kind of see with there could be sort of an equity element to this as well. So just wanted to flag that. Anyway, enough.
Thank you. I was thinking about that paragraph now that you mentioned it, and well, I was thinking the nature or condition of their luggage, and it made me think of, I used to live in Peru, and there's quite an interesting public transport culture there. And I remember going on a bus once, and there was this there was an Andean woman with a massive kind of bag, and there's this squeaky noise all the time on the bus, and I thought it was like some problem with the bus itself. But then I realised she had a massive bag of guinea pigs, and they were squeaking away. And so, in Peru they eat guinea pigs, by the way. So it's a delicacy. But anyway, just to lighten the mood there before our morning tea. Yeah, I think it's a good point about how those conditions are applied. Yep, yeah, they tend to sort of roast them actually. But anyway, moving on. Next on my list is. Are you happy with that, Councillor Saw? We can come back with some thoughts on equity considerations around application of conditions of carriage. And what? And near misses has already been recorded as an action point, and that will be addressed at the Health and Safety Forum next week. So, Councillor Duthie, and then we've got a couple more, Councillor Connolly and Councillor Coopernand, and then I think it might be time for morning tea, potentially.
Thank you, Chair. Two quick questions. For the survey that's covered in this paper, are young people, young passengers, so I noticed there's mention of ages 15 to 17 brackets and so on, but we have people riding the buses that are school children, primary school children. Do they all get captured in the survey? Do we pick up any trends in personal safety and security concerns from the very young cohort?
Through the chair, over the age of 15, under that age, there's privacy considerations because it's a survey.
So we would have to find by other means how there are security trends relating to that very younger cohort. So
correct.
Something good to be aware of. Thank you. Second question is, one of our aggressive behaviour issues from a wee while back now was some cash box thefts on buses. Would they turn up in this sort of reporting, and is that an ongoing problem? Have we had any further incidents of theft, I guess, which has an aggressive, dangerous element to drivers and passengers?
Through you, Chair, so that is reported, and it's a very serious incident, of course. So that is captured in our reporting. Maybe just to make the point that we are in certain parts of the country, and our colleagues, for example, in the Bay of Plenty, see the cash box thefts rising as a particular issue there. It doesn't seem to be an issue in some other parts of the country. Anecdotally, we have heard from New Zealand Police in the past that the cash box thefts and attacks on drivers have been associated with gang initiation and sort of young gang associates, and they can be quite region and city specific.
So there hasn't been any further cash box thefts since that spate we had in Lower Hutt a few months or a year back, maybe?
I'm not aware of them, sorry.
Just from a CE operator forum we had last week, I think Transurban had noted that they'd had 4 recently. Yes.
Do they tend to happen in the same locations, or is it a? I mean, do we have any pattern around that? Any sense of?
I'd need to check on that information.
Could we look into that, please?
We'll take a note on that. We'll look into Cashbox. Probably would be good to get us, generally have that reported to us.
The reminder is that a few years ago, a driver was killed on our network for Cashbox.
So, a few actions to get through. Next is Councillor Conley.
I was also intrigued by paragraph 23, where it states that a passenger's age could cause them to be prevented from boarding. I was curious about that.
Through you, Chair, these conditions of carriage, some of them, they sound as they stand alone, some bizarre, like the luggage one, for example, but actually they have real life applications. So in some cases with luggage, so you mentioned your chinchilla lady or guinea pig lady, we have people turning up with very, very heavy baggage. Of course, the drivers are not obliged to help somebody on with their luggage, and really heavy baggage or baggage that is in an appalling condition that is likely to burst or come apart at the seams. So these things are in because of feedback that we have from staff about issues that they encounter.
Age, though.
Age.
So the age, it can be, some. Well,
too young?
yeah, it can be too young, but it can be somebody who is just incapable of actually getting on board a bus without assistance.
But that is not age, and we cannot discriminate on the grounds of age.
No.
So I would be very careful about putting that in writing. Sorry, that was more in jest than anything else, but I do think there are genuine human rights considerations there. I was more concerned about health and safety at stations than on board vehicles. It's been my experience that stations are often more problematic than on board vehicles themselves, and indeed the report bears that out. But there isn't really much commentary in here on behaviour at stations, although there's some slide decks that talk about the successes we've had at Bunny Street. But also, you talk about some measures that you're looking at, but again, the measures are all on board Metlink services. So I'm just wondering, again, with the follow-up, maybe, if you could talk about what we're doing at stations, particularly around, I'm curious as to whether the CCTV coverage at stations and whether real-time monitoring of that might be included as part of our new, whatever it's called.
Ops Centre.
Ops Centre, yeah.
We'll come back on that. So that's been noted. We'll come back on that. So next is Councillor Coopernand and then Councillor Wolf.
Thank you. My question is about managing safety and what is happening in Paurua, and it follows really on from Roz's comments in that Thomas and I were involved in a multidiscipline meeting in Paurua about issues on Paurua through to Linden stations and that. And there they had police, social welfare, Transdev, Greater Wellington, local mayors, heads of colleges, Maori wardens, and also student representatives. And they were able to discuss and talk about options they could take to give some security to those stations and that. And that was really effective. And I just wonder how often we're looking at involving the broader community into these issues, because they are community issues. And this one worked really well over those stations. The issues went away once they started looking at them, bringing older people in to deal with young school kids and that were at the heart of the problems. And it relates back to comments in here. So can you comment on that? Thanks. How often you're doing that sort of thing?
It's through you, Chair. The forum that you attended has had a spin-off into a more regular get-together of relevant people, which we participate in, both, I think, through a couple of teams, including the rail team. So those conversations are continuing to be had. I think the particular event that you attended was as a result of there being some specific incidents of antisocial behaviour, and those don't seem to have that don't seem to happen now, which is great. I think it was about a year ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that group's doing a good job, and also looking at, how we have people at stations and that kind of stuff.
It was basically school kids between stations. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was a really good initiative, I think, and a good thing to be continuing with. Councillor Wolf.
Councillor Kirkman stole my thunder a wee bit. I noticed in the AT and ECAN reports the liaison with the police. How's that going? Are we in line? The reason I ask is because in the situation that happened with the hate speech situation in Karori, there was a disconnectedness with the police and with other functions, and so that's one question. And the second question is, are they invited to the forum? You've got a forum coming up. Chris mentioned that there were other areas that probably should be represented. The Maori wardens and the police would be two that could probably help us out a little bit, and we help them. Thirdly, there's a greater police presence in Wellington at the moment, a visible presence, and are we encouraging them to use our public transport and to be more involved in that sort of area? Sorry, a lot of questions.
Through you, Chair, before I hand over just on the specific operational stuff. So, third question about encouraging the police. So we just sent a reminder to Area Command a few months ago, actually, I think it was, and which they appreciate. And I actually saw some police officers recently using for police purposes. So yes, when they're on duty, they can use public transport, and they're aware of that, and we've sort of reminded them again. First question about the general relationship. So we've very good open relationship with Police Command. We have a memorandum of agreement in place with them for enforcement powers on the network, an evolving discussion with them in general about the big picture security. And look, I can safely say police are open and welcome for sort of further engagement, further forums. They have spoken in the past on security issues to Transport Committee. So they certainly welcome that. And there are some initiatives that we are looking at. They're sort of a bit on the long finger at the moment because of all the police operational things, but about CCTV camera use and access, etc., etc. So we have a good open discussion, but I'll leave operational discussion specific.
Through you, Chair, just confirming that yes, the police will be here and invited to the workshop next week.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Just one other thing: the sharing of information, the data, so that it merges and is consistent. That's happening.
So if you're referring to data about specific incidents, we do share information with them about those sort of incidents. There is a forum that sort of intelligence sharing, and that's something that we could, if things got more unpleasant, for example, it is something that we could escalate to the police. We have, when we signed the memorandum of agreement with them on getting a Land Transport Act powers, there was a moot that in the future, if it was necessary, we would have more intelligence sharing forum, and that is possible.
Thank you.
Okay, that was good, I think. Have we exhausted the questions, comments, remarks there on that topic? Okay, good. Thanks, team. We've taken quite a few notes there, and there's a few things to come back on, so we will do that in due course. And shall we take a break before we asset management plan it? Okay, so break, and then maybe back at like 11, so we can keep going because there's a bit on. So folks online, we'll be back at 11. Okay, should we get started again? Asset management plan, item 8. Fiona, in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. So this is the paper on the asset management plan. The Asset Management Plan 2024 was published on the website in October 24. Due to the situation with the NLTF funding, we've included in this paper the impact on infrastructure projects. The basis for the impact assessment is the information that's already been discussed and provided as part of the ongoing discussions on budget with Council. We actually publish an asset management plan every year. So I'll just open the floor to questions at that point.
Thanks, Fiona. Councillor Conley?
Through you, Chair, can I ask the Chief Executive if Greater Wellington has an asset management policy? And the reason I ask this is I'm a bit bemused by this paper. So in the flood management space, the asset management plans have to go through multiple subcommittees before coming to this committee to be signed off. But in the public transport space, things are very, very different. So I'm wondering why, and I'm also wondering about the consistency of information we get between our different asset classes, and even the asset management plan that is up on the internet has different bases, i.e. External, internal, book-based ways of assessing the assets that differ from year to year in between asset classes. So it's all a big blah to me, and I'm wondering if you can clarify.
Probably,
I think it was blah, 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 blah.
Probably not to the level of clarity you're looking for, Councillor, but certainly the environment group and the asset management processes they have around the flood assets in particular is different to what the asset management regime and process to bring it to this council is for Metlink. So I can do a bit of looking into that and come back to you with a more detailed answer. But in terms of do we have a consistent, if you want to use that word, asset management policy for all the assets on all the asset classes across the council, well, no, we won't, because they're really quite different, and also including where they're funded from, different obligations to report back. But I can do a bit more work and we can come back with a bit more information.
So I definitely think we need consistency across the organisation, and if there are different approaches to looking at our assets and different sign-offs, we need to state that and state why that is. Again, I think this could be benefited from, and I'm not sure how many people, I know me and Quentin were suckers for punishment and actually went to the website and then trawled through the asset management plan itself. But the particular things we're looking at is what is our asset, what are our critical assets and what condition are they in? Now you can find that with some degree of difficulty when you go onto the asset management plan, but it would have been really beneficial to have put that in this cover paper if that is the information that you're trying to get the committee to be across. In particular, one thing that attracted my attention was the fact that the condition of our EMUs seem to improve over the last 3 years based on the asset management information that's in there. But again, that's using inconsistent bases to assess the asset management. So I wonder if that's the reason. But I would like more information coming back to this committee on just a summary of our critical assets and what condition they're in and whether that is acceptable. Because I think that's the key information this committee needs to get across. And unless you're really dedicated to the cause, you probably won't have gleaned that information from this paper.
Okay, noted. We can do that. Are you thinking like a dashboard, like a summary of that information?
Well, I would expect this cover paper to have noted the different asset classes, what was considered critical, and what the state of those critical assets were. And there's some really interesting other information in that document, but it all requires quite a bit of wading through.
It certainly does, yeah.
Nige?
Yeah, I think there's some work we can do, Councillor, and certainly some of the work that's been done in the environment space with flood protection assets through the subcommittee and some of the questions raising there about the nature and grouping of assets, the criticality of risk around it. We can do a bit of, I can take that back to the team, some of those examples, and we can talk about how we can apply that to some of the Metlink assets perhaps.
Thank you.
Can you comment on our improving assets despite their age?
Specifically the EMU or specifically the EMUs?
That was the one that caught my attention because so if you go in there, it has the scheduled maintenance, but then it also has like a half-life completely refurbishment. So equate that to a kind of classic renewal process. But despite the fact that renewals hadn't occurred, the asset management, the asset and condition seemed to improve over the last 3 years, which sounded weird to me.
Yeah, that's okay. I can take that away. With the condition assessment on the EMUs, I understand that we do desktop assessments, and then every 3 years we do an actual assessment, so it could just be a data thing.
Which goes to my initial question of what are the basis on which we're doing these asset assessments, and do we have consistency across the organisation?
Yep.
Thank you. Excellent scrutiny being applied here to our asset management procedures. I hope we're appreciating that, everybody. Next is Councillor Kirkman.
Thank you. Look, I really want to respond to the comments that Ros has made, because 4 of us here sit on Greater Wellington Rail as directors, and so we have responsibility also for these assets. And so there's overlapping responsibilities in some areas, and so from our point of view, we see that we're not in a position to make the decisions about the purchases of assets, which is really a political and a financial one, which is made at council level here. But we have responsibility for the systems where we're managing the conditions of those assets and that. And so I think that those overlapping responsibilities between council and between directors of Greater Wellington Rail are really important for Fiona and the work she's doing, and also just to make sure that we don't neglect any areas which we are thinking the other party's responsible for, or do the reverse, and both of us try and take responsibilities when it should be sitting in one camp and that. This is not a barrier to give assistance to how we manage those assets, but it's one of the things that we need to get some clarity on as we move forward in that. And I think it'll come about because Fiona and her teams have been talking much more about what we're doing with these assets and that. And I think that we're in a position where through next year we will get much better understanding on those things and bring levels of clarity and respect to how they work in that. So, and I know, Ros, that you raised the issue of assets and being on Wellington Water where they don't have an asset register themselves. I think it's quite an interesting point you raised, Ros.
Thank you. Good. Are we good to go on this one now? Other questions or comments? Oh, Mr. Lenson.
In the paper, it says the accessibility program has been reduced by about 6.7 million, but that the specific impact is still being worked through. What's the process for deciding how that is going to be, that savings is going to be found, and are you working with accessibility groups to prioritise what isn't done? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, through you, Chair. So we are working with also the Accessibility Action Program is a mixture of infrastructure type projects and training type projects. And so with the reduction through NLTF, we're looking at it as a program, and there's a paper next about the Accessibility Action Plan, and we're managing that as a program of work. So I can't specify exactly what infrastructure projects will be affected at this point in time by that reduction, because they'll have to be prioritised, and the process for doing that would be absolutely to work with those groups in doing so.
Yes, that is possibly a good lead into the next item. So shall we go to the next item? Thank you, Fiona. We'll follow up on those asset management procedure questions from you, Councillor Connolly. So item 9, welcome, David. Accessibility Action Plan Overview. Take it away.
Kia ora, Chair. Kia ora koutou Council. I'll just briefly headline this paper and then take questions. So this is the Accessibility Action Plan is a key output of the Accessibility Charter that the Council signed up to in 2021. We're at quite a a key point in that plan. The plan is an evolving thing, but what we will do over time is every year the plan will be updated. It's based on close consultation with the disability community, and this is the first plan that we've linked with the long-term plan. There's been a bit of a delay in introducing the plan because of uncertainty around NLTF funding, but we're really pleased to have received $9.8 million worth of funding specifically for the plan. And that will enable us to do the following things as part of the plan. We'll develop accessibility training for operator staff across all modes and for total mobility. So that will probably be a module of some sort that will improve the quality of training. Look at station accessibility improvements, and that's improvements to infrastructure, and as related to that, implementing a strategy of creating accessible hubs within each TA that will enable people to connect to stations with a high frequency bus route and get through to key regional facilities like Wellington Regional Hospital and Hutt Hospital and Kenepuru Hospital, the airport and the Golden Mile. Improvements to bus replacing train stops, which will be part of the BRT work that we'll share with you this afternoon, but that will ensure that those are accessible. Increased in-person support for disabled people. This will enable us to look at the resources we have through the various different operators, our own transport officers, but also help augment the support we can provide to people through our contact centre. And there's some money there too for us to explore some technology improvements such as announcements of arrivals at railway stations, digital navigation systems, just to sort of keep ahead of the curve in terms of providing technology to people with disabilities. And alongside that, closely associated with the plan, on-bus announcement system, which we're working hard to implement, mostly by the end of this calendar year, we hope. Real-time information, accessibility upgrades. You'll get more detail in the workshop this afternoon, but key additions there are some accessibility features. Bus stop accessibility improvements, a prioritisation of those improvements based around accessibility. RideWise upgrade, the IT system that supports total mobility, and a priority seating awareness initiative. I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Andrew. We've got Councillor Kirkman and...
Thank you, David. With the training modules, I take it they're for the drivers?
Through the chair, correct. Drivers, train staff, and taxi operators.
Okay, so the question that I was trying to understand is where does that training module sit as far as the bus drivers, as an example, are concerned? If they leave transit and go to one of the other employers, are we aware that they've had the appropriate training, or does that information lie with the bus company themselves? Because probably we want it linked to the individual drivers to some degree, and I just wondered what the situation is there.
Well, this, through the chair, this approach will enable some consistency because it will be Metlink led. So the plan is, and we're colleague here, Leanne, who's leading the Accessibility Action Plan, we will create a module that will probably be, for practical reasons, a train the trainer module, but that will be designed by us, and it will be provided to all the operators, so there will be consistency of messaging and protocols across all operators.
So I suppose the point I'm trying to understand is whether there will be some system to acknowledge that individual bus drivers have been through that module process and that, because it's probably an important thing as far as we're concerned, and something that the driver should carry with himself longer term. So I don't expect necessarily an answer, but maybe it's something we could address.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. We need to ensure every driver gets that training.
Good point there. Thank you. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. I've asked this before. I think that people have raised with me the inability for two wheelchairs to be transported on one bus. And my understanding is that new bus procurement will have the ability to have two. I wonder if that could be included in the Accessibility Action Plan as one of the initiatives already underway, even though it's not an initiative under this program, but for people that this is a barrier for them travelling with their wheelchair friends, to be able to see that that is going to gradually improve over time as new buses come on the fleet.
Through the chair, yeah, that's a good point. We could acknowledge that as part of the associated activities.
Thank you. Other comments, questions here? Happy with this? Thank you for the update. Very good. We will move to item number 10. Emerging trends in transport. So Andy Ford is going to take us through this. Great set of papers and very compelling graphics, as always, and data. So, yeah, we're in your hands. Yeah, great paper.
Kia ora koutou councillors. Thank you for having us this morning. Just introducing Toby Pretorius, who works for Tonkin and Taylor. He's helping us finalise the Bus Priority Action Plan 2.0, which is essentially the master plan around how we build rapid transit bus corridors across the Wellington region. So we're very lucky to have Toby with us. He's worked overseas on delivering bus priority projects in the past, and he's also worked within Let's Get Wellington Moving to help design transport corridors. So essentially we've got a quick short update today, which comes in three parts. Andy will give his regular update on standard transport trends that we're currently seeing across the Wellington region. Toby will do a whistle-stop tour of some of the key insights we're seeing from the Bus Priority Action Plan 2.0 and what some of the outcomes of that could be. And we were also asked to provide some more information around the true cost of transport, particularly public transport versus driving, which seems to be quite topical at the moment. So we might have a minute or two at the end just to highlight a little bit of international research. Noting this is a Transport Committee meeting, we'll try and keep this brief, but happy to take any questions on the way through. So I'll hand over to Andy.
Cool, thanks Tim. Yeah, so we've got quite a few slides, so we might skim through a few of them. So that's just the context, so I think we all know. Kind of macro trends, I suppose. The punchline is, again, at a high level, Wellington's kind of still leading the way in terms of that sort of rebound post-COVID, which is now 5 years ago. Sometimes it seems like yesterday, but 5 years. And so we're pretty much at 100%. And you look at some of the other metros, Auckland, Melbourne, Sydney, and they're at sort of 80, 85, 90%. And I think with Melbourne and Sydney, they've actually invested quite a bit in Sydney, certainly got some new infrastructure, which is kind of helping to give them a bit of sort of leg up in terms of where they're going. In terms of the Wellington region, state highway traffic volumes, give or take, are back at pre-COVID levels. Weekdays, but a little bit higher at weekends. Slightly low on Cobham Drive and Vivian Street, and some of that is as due to some kind of works that have gone on. So it's kind of sort of a little bit lower, but it's not kind of massively significant grand scheme of things.
I guess just is that labelling right? That's supposed to be comparing what 2019 and 2024, isn't it?
Yes.
But you've got the colours wrong, isn't it? Is that right?
The colours, so the blues weekday and orange is weekend, and so that the 100% line is, I suppose, what it was in 2019. So kind of what it's showing is anything below the 100% shows that we're a little bit lower in 2024 compared to 2019.
Okay, got it.
Looking at state highway travel times, again, at kind of high level, it's the same sort of trend in the morning, and this is looking at it coming in from Upper Hutt, and it will be something similar coming in down the the Western Corridor. So what we're kind of seeing is congestion starts to build a little bit later in the morning. So there's almost been a little bit of peak contraction, so people having a bit of a line. But also the congestion actually dissipates more slowly. So things have kind of shifted a bit. So kind of big picture, there's no sort of fundamental kind of improvement in state highway travel times. It's about the same as it was. Looking at PT by this is in Wellington by mode. Again, this is kind of what you've kind of been hearing earlier, that weekdays it's kind of slightly below pre-COVID levels. I mean, rail is kind of pulling things down, and we've kind of heard why. Weekend is 120, 130% of pre-COVID levels on both modes, except in obviously rail. There's some kind of peaks and troughs depending on the engineering works that are going on. Bus boardings, this is kind of looking at a bit more of a sort of granular level. So the bars kind of show, the blue bar shows 2019, the orange bar shows 2024, and the green line kind of sort of tracks, I suppose, the 100%. It kind of shows the difference relative to 2019. So we're a little bit lower on bus in the morning peak and the evening peak, but higher in the interpeak and certainly the sort of school peak. In the morning, the interesting thing is you can still see there's again a little bit of that sort of contraction. So the sort of 8 to 9 period is pretty much as it was in 2019. There's a little bit less in the 7 to 9, and some of that it could be people travelling a bit earlier due to the kind of early bird fares. It could be people travelling in the interpeak as well. Kind of rail shows, I suppose, a similar pattern in terms of that sort of trend. In the morning, you've got it's 7 to 8 is slightly less, and it's less between 8 and 9, but perhaps to a lesser extent. And at school, as we kind of note there, child travel seems to be kind of rapidly growing, and you can actually see that sort of 3 to 4 peak on rail, where we've actually got more people than we actually had in 2019. Cycle volumes, I mean, the caveat with some of this is that some of the data, there's been a lot of investment in cycle infrastructure, and it's actually kind of quite hard to get, I suppose, a clean data series to sort of look at 2019 and 24. But what we can kind of find from your Oriental Parade is it's been a 20-25% increase in cycle volumes over that period. And if you look at some of the other infrastructure around the Cambridge Terrace Cycleway, that's showing a 60% increase kind of year on year, which some of that will be new trips, some will be kind of reassigning from Tasman Street and things like that. So kind of what we're doing is we're working with partners, Wellington City, to just get more granular data and more granular monitoring, and so through time we'll get a better picture of kind of the growth that we're seeing, but also actually the response to the infrastructure. Just a quick one, I suppose, corridor analysis. On the left, you're looking at vehicles along some of the key corridors inbound in the morning. On the right, you've got people in those vehicles. And so it kind of shows quite clearly that on some of the corridors, you've got 30, 40, 50% using bus or cycling. And in terms of Thorn and Quay, you've actually got more people on PT there and cycling than general traffic, which kind of just highlights, I suppose, how PT is so vital in terms of actually carrying more people with fewer vehicles.
Absolutely killer slide, this one. Just super efficiency of public transport, just on one page. Really, really good. Value for money.
Yeah. So we've got another couple of slides on this as well, which highlights that corridor analysis by volume of traffic and obviously the people being carried.
I think probably one of the caveats here, and maybe this is something that we can do for a subsequent presentation, is looking at the interpeak and the weekends. The picture is slightly different, and so that, I suppose, shows kind of what goes on there, but also the opportunities there as well. This chart here kind of shows, so we've done a bit of analysis looking at snapper tag-ons on bus and rail over the course of a week during the morning peak, to understand the average rail user, how many times do they take take the train in the morning peak. The average bus user, how many times do they take the bus in the morning peak? And the general trend for rail is that you've got around the average rail user, Lower Hutt, Wellington, about 2.4, 2.5 boardings per week. But as you kind of go further out from Wellington, that number decreases. So Kapiti is less than 2, and the Wairarapa is sort of 1.5, 1.6, which is kind of that sort of distance effect that we kind of see from, I suppose, working from home. I think the Wairarapa was probably, to some extent, we don't really have the data to support it, was probably to some extent lower than the rest of the region pre-COVID, but that kind of trend has continued.
So just this one's quite important for us because it is actually impacting our revenues quite significantly. So we are seeing essentially shorter journeys. So our average fare across the network is dropping because people on average are travelling fewer zones. If they travel fewer zones, obviously the fare is smaller, but very strong correlation between distance travelled and the working from home dynamic. It's almost a perfect correlation at times.
Just thinking about that fare revenue question, a couple of slides back, the increasing proportion of children and school students in our passenger numbers is also going to be affecting our fare revenue.
Correct. And between the removal of the fare subsidies earlier this year, I think that's sort of created a dynamic that's quite a challenge at the moment.
So this is just some kind of analysis of the 2023 census that we've done. The big shift from 2018 to 2023 is, people who essentially their mode of travel to work is actually kind of working from home. So that's jumped up from 9 to 19%, and all the other percentages have dropped proportionately. I think that one of the sort of slight nuances with the census is that just talks about what do you do kind of on average. So the average person might work from home. Someone who works from home 2 days a week and is in the office 3 days a week would actually be saying if they take the bus for those 3 days, they'd be taking the bus. Whereas we know that it's not quite as cut and dried as that. But even with if you kind of stripped out the working from home, you kind of see in 2023 that PT and active mode share of those journey to work trips was slightly lower than 2018. But since 2023, we've had quite a big uplift in patronage. So if you were to do the census again this year, you'd probably get something that was pretty similar in terms of the PT active and mode share.
So I think we had the census was done in March last year, so it's now more than 18 months out of date. And I think we've had a patronage increase of about 10% in that vicinity. So very roughly as a yardstick, you'd say that we're back to the same level of mode share, maybe even slightly higher than we were prior to COVID. So I think there has been a degree of mode shift, but it has been that significant, I guess, is the takeaway.
Yep. And this is just a summary of what I've talked through, so I won't dwell on this. And it's over to Toby for some bus priority action plan.
Kia ora koutou. Chair, thank you for the opportunity. So we've just finished the draft of the new bus priority action plan, which is we've taken the 2019 bus priority action plan and done a refresh of the previous corridors, but now we've also included Poreroa City and Hutt City as well. There's 6 corridors in those two cities included in the BPAP. The 13 corridors were chosen because they have very high numbers of passengers and also have problems with travel times and reliability. So we've just taken a snapshot of 2 of the corridors, and the 2 corridors we chose, the reason I chose them was because of the potential interaction with the tunnel project. So it's the Newtown to City corridor and the Miramar to City corridor. And so to the stats that Andy showed earlier, this is another one where you can see, so for the Newtown corridor, there's about 1,600 passengers in that hour. Only 27 buses carried almost more than 50% of that number of passengers in that hour. And if you can see in the histograms or the bar charts on the right, there's significant opportunity for travel time savings if we can implement some bus priority measures. Similar I'm kind of partial to this corridor. This is the one I use every day. And yeah, so and this obviously is also the route to and if we can get some articulated buses on this corridor, you can, the potential to increase patronage is also very good. So yeah, again, the split is 50-50 in terms of passengers carried, but the number of buses is not very high. So just again, 35 buses carrying 638 passengers in that 1 hour. And I think it potentially some days will be higher than that. This is an average over a month for weekdays. So some days may be higher than that. Then I'll just a slide on the reliability measure that we use to look at the various corridors around the city, the region. And there you can see, again, I've highlighted Miramar to the city route, where there's I think it's a 20 to 40% reliability. So if you think about it, if it in a simplified way, if a trip takes 10 minutes, if you have a 30% reliability issue, there's a 6-minute swing potentially. So, I mean, that's not an ideal situation for a passenger. And then obviously, we've done some work, and I think you're all aware of the Harbour Keys and the Golden Mile report we produced a while back. And again, there we've got this great opportunity to get the second spine routes and the bus services running on the second spine to alleviate the pressure off the Golden Mile, and in doing that, improving service quality and reliability on both those corridors.
Hey, thank you. Can I just quickly say thank you, Toby, and thank you to your team for producing this as well. Just if you scoot back a slide, so those bar graphs on the right hand side, where you have the darker shade in the bars, estimated potential journey time without delay. So when you say without delay, that would be achieved through the actions set out in your bus priority action plan, or is that some sort of more kind of idealized scenario?
Great question, Jay. I'm a bus advocate, so everything I'm saying is idealized. But no, so that's a great question. So that is purely running speed and dwell time. So if you can reduce congestion completely, so if you can get for some reason a BRT on that corridor, but there's significant things that you can do by just reallocating road space. So we haven't looked at anything, no major infrastructure changes at this stage.
So those darker shaded estimated potential journey time without delay, that's essentially dedicated right of way.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a list of questions. Actually, I was sort of interrupting, naughty me. But you wait to the end. Okay. So have you got something on this one?
Yeah. Thanks, Toby. My comment here is: what's the difference in importance between the bus corridors in peak times and off-peak times? Because when you talk about and the reason I'm asking is because when you talk about time saving, there's a lot more value in time saving for a full bus compared to a bus with 2 people in it. And so my point is to understand the impact of rapid transit corridors in peak hours and whether they have significant value in off-peak hours for the balance of people that are travelling through this.
Chair, through you. So that's a good question again. And I suppose it's looking around what we want Wellington to be as a city. Do we want it to be densified along corridors? Do we want tidal movement into the city, or do we want people to move in all directions throughout the day? And so the best public transport systems in the world are so when you, I shouldn't really compare Wellington with Hong Kong, but the density around the public transport is so high that you have movement in both directions during pretty much all day long. So I think it's important. It'll encourage people to use it off peak as well. So school trips, giving people more choices as well during the day. But The benefit just purely for the peaks is so great that I think that on its own is good enough.
Councillor Lee, are you on the bus corridors question, or what did you want to wait for later?
Oh, somewhat. It's almost, yeah. Okay, I'll ask it anyway.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Toby, or for Andy or Tim, but the morning peak, right? I think we've tried to flatten out that peak, but probably not that successful. So have we given up on cracking that nut and now switching to improving the efficiency?
Through you, the chair, another good question. We have been modestly successful in the peak. I think Andy and I have come to the conclusion that the off-peak 50% discount has led to some behavioural change. I certainly know and have a lot of anecdotal evidence from people working in government and friends that they do actively try and move outside of the peak, particularly for those longer distance rail journeys, which can be quite expensive. So there is a degree of evidence of peak spreading, and I think some of Andy's slides earlier did show that we were certainly having fewer people travelling during the peak, and the interpeak is at 120 to sometimes 130% of its pre-COVID levels. So I think a degree of peak spreading has happened. How much of it is actually a direct result of the fare changes, it's hard to tell, versus travel patterns post-COVID, which are definitely quite different as well.
Cool. Okay, thanks. Should we move on from bus corridors? Oh, quick one, Councillor Duthie.
I'm interested in the bus corridors in Lower Hutt. I'm wondering if you could share the pictures for those particular areas of the committee.
Yes, and through you, the chair, we're starting to work directly with Hutt City Council and Porirua City Council to share those plans, so we can have longer term integrated transport plans to build in the improvements. And I think just to build on Toby's comments, this is quite a long term journey. We're certainly not going to have fully traffic separated rapid transit corridors anytime soon, but there are a large number of modest interventions we can potentially make, starting with the second spine. So it's great to have the long-term vision of what's achievable and the time savings, which you'll see on that slide there. But at the end of the day, this is very much a longer-term journey, and having a master plan has been very, very useful. So thanks to Toby and his team for starting us on this journey.
Thank you very much. Carry on.
Okay, this one was by popular request. And once again, Toby's probably going to help me out here because it's all come from him. So we've looked at the cost of PT and driving. Actually, that might have been Andy on this one. So we've just indexed the cost of diesel versus the cost of our fares. You'll notice that we've broken our fares up to peak and off-peak, which was interesting to me. I just found out that we didn't have an off-peak fare until about 8-9 years ago. What it essentially shows, even though diesel is not the primary driver necessarily, or petrol's not the primary driver for public transport for private car use cost, is showing us that overall that has gone up by about 10 to 20%, and it does vary quite a bit. The council's made some pretty large fare increases over the last 2 years, which I'm sure everybody's well aware of, but essentially we've kept up with inflation as a council, and the off-peak is obviously much, much cheaper than it was historically because there was no off-peak discount. So that's essentially where we have been as Greater Wellington Regional Council. There's a little bit of international research we've got here. This is discussed quite a bit in PT forums. What is the true cost of travel, particularly public transport versus private car? There's a lot of hidden costs in there: the fixed cost of owning a car, the registration, the warrant of fitness, the maintenance, and then there's the variable cost, which is essentially the petrol or even the charging if you've got an EV. And you can see there that public transport, we've got another slide that says a very similar thing on the next slide over. It comes in quite a lot lower, but once again, people do see the fares on a daily basis, so they do see those costs, and they probably are more visible. And once again, it's quite a lot of international research about the social cost of car ownership, which obviously is something that we're hotly debating at the moment with government, particularly around congestion, which relates to health costs, relates to additional infrastructure and roading maintenance, and then obviously greenhouse gas emissions and carbon costs. So I think it's pretty well known that public transport is reasonably, well, it's probably not relatively well known that public transport is quite good value for money when you compare it to the whole of life cost of driving. And then obviously you add on top of that the social costs and the social benefits of public transport as well. So happy to take questions on that. We've got a very similar slide there. So this is Toby reached out. Was it you reached out to Todd? Did you?
Todd Littman.
Yeah, Todd Littman the other day. So he's done an extensive research on the average cost of driving by mode. And this one's quite an interesting one here because you see public transport flattens off at some point, which is essentially a monthly pass. So you pay for your monthly pass, and then it doesn't really matter how much more you travel, you sort of still keep paying the same amount. And you can see there's quite considerable savings on a per annum basis, regardless of how far you might need to travel. And they've taken into account a lot of things, including the electric car, compact cars, and things like that. Once you look at the whole of life cost of buying the car, maintaining the car. So yeah, I think the takeaway. I don't know, Toby, if you've got any other thoughts on that. It's about, but it seems to be public transport seems to be a reasonably small percentage relative to private car use.
I was just reflecting on this morning again. Like that's based on large cities in America, and then the question might be why? How can we compare New Zealand with America? New Zealand has the highest car ownership per capita, higher than the US. So we're sitting at 869 cars per 1,000 people. The USA is on 860. So yeah.
So the trends here would be even more pronounced in New Zealand than they are in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bringing up the average.
Okay. So I think that's the end of the presentation, right? Oh, there's one more slide?
Yeah, so
this
is just really a recap, and we're trying to sort of tie some of these insights back to how we might treat public transport differently in the future, what might we change from a strategic perspective. Once again, really clear trends for travel on the off-peak, and once again, we'll be looking very closely about how we can encourage off-peak travel and how we can make it easier. That includes recreational travel. It's very clear that people are traveling not just to go to work nowadays. They're doing it for social reasons, recreational reasons, and obviously that's why we're looking at certain products and event-based ticketing. So it's something we'd like to continue to enhance our service offering just to make it easier to take recreational travel. And bus prioritization, look, that's just showing to be a no-brainer in the time savings for some very busy corridors. We're talking up to 80,000 people a day down some of these corridors. That's the Golden Mile. And if you lop off 10 minutes of their travel time or even 6 minutes of the travel time, that is really, even from an economic perspective, that's a huge savings. So we really need to accelerate that work. We believe there's no point sort of doing too much more investigation. We just need to get on with it. Cost of travel. Yes, this is something that we will raise with the council perhaps next year when we talk about advertising and sponsorship, whether you guys want to more actively promote the relative cost of public transport. It's something that sort of some PTAs around the world have tried, but it's been of moderate to limited success when they've done that. But that's something we can discuss next year as well. And once again, patronage recovery. I think we've had the fastest patronage recovery in Australasia. So I think this council's done a pretty amazing job to get us back to 100%. And while we still have some challenges on the network, it's nice to see that we're at a level that's as good as we were hopefully 2018, 2019.
Okay, thank you very much. This is great material. And so we've got Councillor Staples, Mr. Lenson, Councillor Saw, Councillor Connolly, and then Councillor Lee. So Councillor Staples and Cooper.
Cool, thanks very much. My questions, comments are around the cost of car ownership, and great paper, fantastic amount of information in it. But I was just a wee bit disappointed on, I guess, the lack of granular information around the cost of car ownership, because if you go to the AA, they do annual reports every year about the dollar cost of car ownership. And I think that is where we need to get when we're, as councillors, talking to the public. Because as you said, their PT, they pay their whatever per week or their monthly pass, or they're tagging on and off with Snapper, and they see that amount. But with a car, they don't equate the fact that it costs them $1,000 to put new tyres on over 2 years or whatever. So I really think it would be useful rather than us individually going to the AA and getting the reports. This is what it costs you per week to travel from Miramar to CBD, Wairarapa to CBD. This is the true cost of running your car. And the AA, they have EVs and they have diesel and they have whatever, and it's in dollar terms. So if we can do that, I'm not saying, before Christmas or whatever, but if when we're going out and having the conversation around the true cost of running your car versus public transport, that we have some dollars, because I think that will mean more than the graph that we can disseminate, but perhaps will go over the heads of the public. My second comment, please, is on page 79 and the social cost of car ownership, which I don't think anybody would disagree about, pollution, etc. But I think we just need to be a wee bit careful saying health costs less physical activity. Now, that might be so if you normally walk to work and then you take your car, but to extrapolate that, because I drive a car from where I live, that I have less physical activity, I think is a bit of a broad brush, because I'm probably a hell of a sight more physically active than a lot of people that jump on the bus. So while I see what you're saying, I think it's the public paper, and we just need to be a little bit careful that we don't just say, well, someone who has a car is less physically active, because they could be a mountain biker or like Ken up the hills every day, or I just, can we please just be careful how we use that? Thank you.
We can definitely do the first thing, side by side dollar. We can get that. I think we can get that easily. And yeah, social costs. I think that's basically a sort of international literature norm thing, isn't it? We didn't make that up.
Chair, through you, I suppose it's the act of commuting. In the act of commuting, if you getting out in your car at home and you drive door to door, where as opposed to walking, 300, 400 meters to a bus stop, getting into the city. I'm kind of referencing my own trip, getting into the city, walking around the city, and then in the afternoon, getting in a bus or walking to a different bus stop. So I walk a lot more than if I would have been driving. So I suppose just more clarity around that.
Yeah, no, I understand what Councillor Staples is saying. We just could have been contextualising. I mean, everyone travels for a reason. You can't take every journey on foot. It's just not practical. So we just needed to contextualise it.
It's not about the person, it's about the act. Yeah. Very good. Next is Mr. Lenson.
Two questions. One, just because I'm curious, what is the variable cost of walking? And second, is it shoes? Food.
Chafing.
Sunburn.
And second, slightly more substantive question. On the Metlink website, a journey planner, it shows the cost of private travel versus public travel. And I think it's actually really disingenuous at the moment, because it nearly always shows a private car being cheaper, because it seems to be just based, I think, on fuel costs. Is it possible to try and update that to take into account all these extra fixed costs that, as we've already discussed, are not recognised by the public often?
Take the latter one. Great observation. I think the answer to that would be yes. I think we need to probably take the full life cost of the transport, not just petrol. So yeah, good suggestion. We'll pass it on to the team.
Good, fix that. Good, thank you. Councillor Saul, yep.
Cool. Thank you. I love this. I've been waiting for this. It's like Christmas has come early with this information. With the health costs that Councillor Staples just mentioned, I wonder if we could factor in the cost of the risk of injury, because I know that Waka Kotahi had done a bit of work in the Road to Zero campaign of putting a dollar amount of the cost of people being injured in car accidents and so forth. So I wonder if that could be incorporated into the health cost, and that might take away from the less physical activity element of it, because it is more dangerous to be in a car. So it would be good to see that reflected. Just in the environmental costs as well, I guess there's that element of the particulates into our fresh water, brake pads and so forth. So I wonder if that could be also mentioned as part of the environmental cost, because I think a lot of urban populations don't really understand the impacts that they have on their freshwater catchments. So I think incorporating cars into that and traffic is a good one. And you did note on the last slide that the comms messaging around true cost hasn't necessarily been successful in other jurisdictions, but I wonder if public transport could be promoted as a fix for congestion, but also you can text while riding as opposed to texting while driving, like all the things you can do while you're either sitting on a train or on a bus. And then my final suggestion was, probably should be me, but maybe our comms team could look at trying to influence some of the traffic reports that we hear in the media, because all I hear about are traffic times for cars, but we never hear a comparative on those traffic reports on morning radio shows or TV on breakfast shows about the relative comparison around public transport. Just a couple of suggestions.
Or biking.
Yeah, I wasn't going to get into that. I was just going to go with public transport. We'll just carve that one first. Thanks.
Yep.
Good. Yep. Next is Councillor Connolly.
Councillor Staples largely asked my question, but I do think we need to apply a little bit of behavioural economics thinking to some of the stats that we put up around car ownership. So what I'm thinking is even the greenest of us usually have a car at home because we like having a car to go to the hospital and to get our groceries and to, get big things. And so a lot of the costs are already sunk in our mind. And so when I was quite interested in the way you had those graphs of the different costs of cars, because I would have thought a big amount of the cost was incurred on day one. And then, and you buy the car, you've sunk a lot of money, and then you have to register and warrant it just as a baseline, and then there's a more variable cost depending on how much you use it, and that wasn't reflected in that graph because they went up. So I do think the question, I have a car, I try to make myself catch public transport as often as I can, but for me it's not a calculation of the whole of the life cost of the car because I've already got the car. So I do think we need to think of that in some of our stats.
Through you, the chair, I fully agree. In fact, there's like 3 graphs that sit there. One is the whole of life cost if you never owned a car. There's one if most of us do own a car for exactly those reasons, and then it becomes a lesser list of setup costs. So the setup costs, like the cost of the car, is pretty much covered. You'd still have the registration, you might have your warrant of fitness, you'll pay for the diesel, and there'll be a few other things like new tyres once in a while. But I think maybe it's best to present it in 3 different ways. So you've got, the true cost of owning, the life cycle cost of the car, or the full life cycle cost, and then you've got the assuming you already have a car, what's the difference in terms of travel costs? And I think we could break that out quite easily.
I think the other point is the value of the car. The value of the car to you is significant, right? And the value, and that's the thing that's getting lost, I think, in the moment about the value of public transport. It's not just the value to the user for getting from A to B. It's the value to everybody else for not having people on the road, etc., etc. But and I think that's another sort of graph that could be looked at. We always come and give us amazing graphs, then we say, "Hey, here's some other amazing graphs."
Some more ones.
It's just but it is good.
Can I just make a quick point through you, Chair? I've kind of seen some of this analysis presented before when they've looked at kind of car sharing schemes as well. So, which obviously there's relatively decent car share scheme in the central Wellington, probably less so elsewhere. But I suppose maybe there's an angle that we can just take away and see if we can use that, because that would, people will need to use a car. But if you don't own a car, it's actually a lot cheaper. Someone else owns the car and you're just renting it.
Yeah, that's useful. Councillor Staples, did you have a quick reaction on this? No. Okay. Then, so we'll go to Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I love the data and data analysis. I've got a friend who's a data modeler. He said data modeling is always wrong, but very useful.
And I would agree with that, yeah.
But my question relates to cost of travel. Do you think I think we've got a pretty high uptake of EVs. I think just around our table, there's about 5 of us who have EVs. Do you think that's probably one of the biggest threat to public transport? Because it's definitely makes travelling very cost efficient, even with the ruck. But in terms of time, because you haven't really looked at it in terms of travel time, because that's probably a big decider, isn't it, in terms of convenience. And if you put on the fact that if you've got an EV, it's actually very cheap to travel. So do you think that's probably one of the biggest threats to public transport?
Through you, the chair, I think EVs are definitely one cost because there'll be clear visibility on the cost of petrol versus the cost of power, which is a fraction of the cost of petrol. I think probably one of the biggest deciders, particularly for Wellington, is the cost of parking. I think that's one of the biggest barriers, and I think we've got to keep a close eye on that because the minute we become more expensive than parking for journeys, I think that's probably where most people will start moving back into their cars, which is why we are very concerned about the rate of fares increases. We believe if the fares do get raised by a percentage that's quite significant, we will become less competitive against parking, particularly when there's multiple people taking the journey. So I think it's a factor when people make personal decisions, but I suspect parking's probably a slightly bigger one in that space.
So parking could actually be used as a form of crew congestion charging.
I think it is, and I think we've mentioned this in council before, that the biggest single thing we can do to get mode shift in public transport overnight, well, it wouldn't be overnight, but would be congestion charging, because that is one of the biggest behavioural changes when the cost of private car use becomes very apparently much more expensive than PT, and we believe that mode shift could be up to 40% immediately.
Next is Councillor Cooperland.
Thank you. I think with mode shift, there's two approaches to it. One is to force people, and the other one is to bring about a voluntary compliance. And when I look at the bus prioritisation there and the comments about potentially starting with peak times, I think that we are concentrating on the bus side of it, but we should think of it from the driver's point of view, and we should be taking an approach that we're discouraging people from travelling through the central city during peak hours in their cars. We do this by bringing in clearways and that are not available, you know, where you can't park during that time, say to people, do that. And I just wonder whether we shouldn't be bringing that into the picture in a broader sense. So not just on some of the key routes, but on a much wider number of routes through the city. So we have clearways there that work during peak hours, and we're making the point for mode shift that if you want to come in town in your own car, well, make sure you turn up when parking's available, sort of thing. And so I think that would win us more friends in the change to mode shift.
Yeah, I think through you, the chair, I think you're correct, and I think AT's approach to rapid transit bus corridors as being small and incremental, and gradually bringing about changes, including clearways, is definitely an approach, and eventually people adapt to those roading changes, and you get the patronage up. But I think some of the metrics that both Andy and Toby showed were quite clear that already 50% of people in peak times are coming on public transport. If we can increase our patronage by 50%, we will actually be reducing the cars on the road by an equal amount, by 50%. And that's kind of a win-win if we can prove that through the rapid transit bus corridor program, that it could actually be good for not only PT users but also non-PT users that have to use a car to get to the hospital. That would be a win-win, I think, and be very powerful. But yeah, small incremental improvements like clearways is definitely one approach.
I make the point because you're more likely to get more public support over the changes if you do that, because there's a lot of sensitivity about stopping cars coming into the city for the very reasons Councillor Connolly says about picking up items they want, things like that.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Duffy.
Just a quick comment coming back to Councillor Connolly's point about the fixed cost involved in cars. I think it's quite valuable to think of car at a household level rather than individual level. And the greatest potential is around the second or third car in a household. Most households are going to need to have a car for those shopping trips and so on. But then the household economics question is the price of that second or that third car for the other spouse or a tertiary student or something like that. That's where the economics really. And there's a lot of, we know some suburbs in Lower Hutt have an average of more than 2 cars per household because of the nature of their transport. And so there's real potential there to see public transport as that alternative to the second or third car, more than it is to replace cars entirely for a household. One other brief comment is in terms of time, it's it's easy to assume that driving a car could be quicker than public transport. And in my case, from Belmont, actually, I can get from home to here work in exactly the same time by bike, train, bike than it takes to drive door to door, well, at least to the Greater Wellington car park. So there's interesting dynamics. Some trips will be a lot quicker by car than the alternatives, and other trips will actually be quicker by walking or biking or public transport than cars. So that would be quite a nuanced analysis, that one, and would very much depend on where you are and where the corridors go.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, certainly at peak time from the airport into town, you've got a dedicated tunnel through Mount Victoria for the bus, so that is quicker at peak time than driving a private vehicle. So it might be good to actually just pull out some of those journeys that are quicker by public transport at peak times. Okay, Councillor Laban.
I was on the 804 bus from Wainui to Waterloo this morning and caught the Wairarapa train into town, and I was here in 30 minutes. If I'd driven a car, by the time I got off at the platform at Wellington Railway Station, it'd still be at intersection of Buick and the Esplanade in Petone. Over the long course of many of us that are in the room, both elected and staff, we've had a number of intelligent, informed conversations and debates over cars many years. And when I hear 869 cars per 1,000 people, it's a pretty damning indictment of either our, by whatever measure, the numbers headed in the wrong direction. That we all know. I think Councillor Saw kind of touched on potentially what could be a way out, but I just trying to think that if we had a plan to get that 869 down to 500 in the next 4 years, what would that look like? What would be required? How much would that cost? Is that an intelligent, reasonable, rational goal, or am I an idiot? I think the answer probably lies somewhere in between. Some would lean more towards than the other, but do we need to be a bit more bold and a bit more aggressive in our marketing campaign? Like, there's nothing that's been said here this morning that do any of us disagree with, but I just I feel a sense of we've been here before, and 869 per 1,000 tells me that whatever we do is not working. And is it time for radical change? And if so, what does that change look like? I don't know the answer. Sorry, but
Councillor Sword, do you have, you maybe have the answer to that? Another question. Oh, well, we'll see if does Andy have the? Maybe Andy has the.
Through you, Chair. I don't have the answer necessarily, but the Wellington transport emissions reduction program that regional transport team produced last year, that essentially showed out to 2035, what would need to be required, almost working back with modelling to say, okay, get 25% reduction in VKT per capita, which wouldn't get you from 860 to 400, but it would get you a decent way there. And I suppose that kind of showed that there needs to be a step change in land use, transport planning, more investment, but also the on the other side of it is actually the road user charging and making it more expensive to drive. And I suppose that's you kind of need that carrot and stick to get that step change. But so I suppose that is the kind of document that shows this is the pathway.
Yeah, that is a good document. The emissions reduction pathway, the transport emissions reduction pathway for the region. The other thing, I guess, is whatever way you cut it, the one thing you're definitely going to need to achieve what you're rightly pointing out should be the objective is massively scaling up the quality, affordability, and accessibility of public transport. There's just no two ways about that. So if we want to achieve that, we have to do that. So, and we can't do that on our own, but I guess we can do our best. But Councillor Saw, last question on this.
Yeah, my question was how we seem really positive and convinced in endorsing a lot of the findings that you're presenting us. I'm curious to know how our TA colleagues ingest this information. There's some quite ward-specific data points there that are really useful to councillors in those particular communities. And also just curious to know how the Regional Transport Committee membership interprets this data. Are they as excited like it's Christmas for them?
Through you, the chair, that this might be at a political and an officer level question, I suspect. At an officer level, we have some very good support and a collaborative working arrangement with WCC. We meet frequently almost on a daily basis at the moment. I think it's a very important aspect of the transport network because it needs to be designed in conjunction. We also need the buy-in of NZTA because you'll notice some of those corridors we talked about are down state highways as well. So if you have that joined up view and you have a collaborative working arrangement, some of these step changes that we've talked about that we need to put into place are achievable. But I think that's the challenge. We are a diverse regional council. We've got a number of TAs that we have to work with to deliver these outcomes. And I think we've got some TAs that are certainly more conducive to working to than perhaps others. However, I would have to say that the ones that we are looking at the moment, which is PCC, Hutt City Council and Wellington City Council, we have good established relationships with. But a lot of that authorisation, particularly when you talk about giving up car parking and making roading changes, plays out at a political level. And I think that's the challenge that all councils face, and I'm not sure how you solve that one, to be honest.
Thank you. Councillor Staples, do you want to talk about regional? Yeah, Regional Transport Committee. Okay, so we're getting there. 3 more items. Should we do 3 more items and then break? Yes. Yep. Okay. Because Matt's coming at 1. Okay, so we'll have to do that. So let's be. Yep. So item 11 is Public Transport Advisory Group. Hey, thanks for that, guys. That was really good material, by the way. Thanks. So we've got Mr. Lenson and Bonnie on my list, but Mr. Lenson, you happy to just take it away?
Sure, I'm just looking to David to join me here. I was unfortunately not at the last PTAG meeting because I was stuck in Wanganui, of all places. And so I can't...
Great place.
Steady on, steady on.
I didn't say anything bad about it. I said I was stuck there. And so I can't speak specifically to the contents, but of course I can talk more generally about why PTAG may think some things. Otherwise, I will leave it to David to answer specific questions.
Thanks, Mr. Lesson. David, got anything to add?
No, just ready to answer any questions on the topics that were shared with PTAG.
Right. Are there any questions? Don't worry. We've got time. We're not rushing you. Councillor Connolly has a question.
So my question, I guess, is on my favourite topic, which are buses replacing trains. Everybody's favourite topic. Darren's left. He's so. I'm just. So paragraph 35 lays out a bit of a timeline to make improvements on BRT, which is really useful. I guess a thing that we've constantly been messaging and is supported by what's come out of the PTAG meeting is around the fact that comms around BRT is poor. I guess I didn't see in those phases that you've identified at paragraph 35 a focus on comms in any of the phases. So I'm just looking for assurance that is part of the plan. Maybe there'll be more discussion later this afternoon.
Through the chair, yes, comms is a considerable part of the plan, and we'll share that in this afternoon's workshop.
Thank you, very good. If there are no other questions... Oh, there is another question, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not a question, it's really just a shout out to the PTAG team because I think it was Leanne, she put on a afternoon tea yesterday for one of the long-standing members, Miles, and I think he was there right from the beginning, wasn't it, of PTAG. He unfortunately had to step down from being a member, and I think it was a really good gesture by PTAG and Greater Wellington to actually reflect his contribution to the committee. I mean, to the group. So thanks.
Thank you very much. That's a good acknowledgement. Okay, we'll move on. I think. Thank you very much for that item. We're accelerating towards the end of the meeting, so we're going to. I think item 12. Sam, you just.
Thank you, Chair. I think we can take this report as read. I just want to note that in paragraph 24 and paragraph 30, where we're talking about the some of the report, it refers to the AMR, the annual monitoring report. It should actually refer to the annual report. So it's the council's annual report in those two paragraphs it should be referred to. And I just wanted to note that in the matter of the bike racks, which is in the regulatory issue around that, that's our work on that is ongoing with NZTA and all of the other PTAs. So yeah, we'll advise you as soon as a resolution to that has been landed.
Thank you. Take that as read. Any questions on that? It is moving along in a procedural manner that is fine. Councillor Duffy.
I guess, just to note that with our headline target around mode shift, we've got a long way to go. If we're currently at 29% and the target would have us at 39% mode share by 2030, that's quite a lot of work to do in the next 5 years to achieve that. So,
foreshadowed by Councillor Laban earlier. Yeah.
Good to remember the challenge.
There's the things that are within our control and the things that we can have influence over and the things that are outside of our control. And I guess that's got to keep that in our mind. But okay, so we're happy with that. Thank you. That's item 12. So final item 13 is our performance report for October. So Paul and Matt, excellent. Another good report here. You can take us through.
Afternoon all. I suppose this report's based on October, so just wanted to pause for a minute because I think this is the last committee meeting for the year, just to acknowledge the Metlink performance, and I suppose the other agencies that are involved in Hikoi. As someone who sort of just joined the organisation, it was pretty amazing to see the operation stress tested the way it was, and how well I think that and how good the collaborative approach was, the communication from all the agencies to make it a pretty cool day.
Yeah, just an average day for us around here, mate.
Yeah. Okay, so October numbers. So bus patronage continues to be strong, over 100% of 2019 numbers. Reliability over bus 2 was also good. I think Renee gave the same numbers this morning, 99.6%, and that's been for the last 2 months. And again, this probably goes to reflects the increased capability we have in the driving workforce at the moment, and low attrition rates. Just as a offside, I was speaking to one of the operators on Wednesday, and he was saying that their attrition rate's at 1.8%, so that's pretty good. Yeah. Punctuality on bus, so that's meeting the target. Target's 95%, so we're at 95.8%. Rail patronage remains below the 2019 levels. 73.2% of pre-COVID numbers. I think Tim spoke to that earlier about the changes in travel behaviour, and some of that relating to work from home. Rail reliability and punctuality still needs improvement, but this is proven a little difficult with the speed restrictions we've had over the Kapiti lines and the Wairarapa lines. That should see some improvement in November on the Wairarapa lines, because the speed restrictions relating to the vibrations on the track have been resolved. Are there any questions?
Cool, thanks. You've got Councillor Staples and Councillor Connolly.
Thank you. Mine relates to page number 143. And it's looking at the figures, the percentage figures for reliability, and it probably applies to some of the other figures as well. Now, I don't profess to be a strong mathematician. I never have. It's not my strong point. But I'm wondering how the total, down the bottom of the page, the total is made up, the totals, because I thought it was an average, but it's not, because if you add them up and divide it by 4, it's not an average. So I just wondered what the total actually means.
You're looking at those tables,
Yeah,
reliability tables.
for instance, reliability, and you've got your percentage for each line, and then it's got a total. And I'm just wondering how that total is worked out. I'm not worried about it or whatever, but I just can't understand how it's worked out.
It's page 143 indulgent, is it?
It is.
Well, it's not on our printed copy, it's 141.
Yeah, it's 143 indulgent, so that's a little curveball. But it's the one with the rail reliability plotted, and then the tables down below. It's a line graph and then tables underneath.
Kia ora through you, Chair. Because it's so that is it's a percentage of the total trips. There's a different number of trips per line, so it's not an average of each of the percentage per line.
Brilliant. There we go. That's solved. Thank you very much. Brilliant that you were here. Maybe. No. Councillor Connolly and then Ms. Lenson.
Sorry, back to broken record, Ros here again on the subject of bus replacements. I feel a little bit like the data that we're showing here is a bit akin to when we had the driver shortage, insofar as we present the data and it looks really good, but it in this case is only reflecting 80% of the rail journeys, because 20% of the rail journeys are being replaced by buses. And we're not getting, and so it shows great punctuality and great reliability for the 80% of the service that is actually happening is supposed to, but there's a whole 20% of the picture that's missing. And again, might be a subject for this afternoon, but I feel like we could have a bit more data on what is happening with the bus replacements. What is their reliability? How punctual are they? Now, I'm not going so far as to say that the unplanned buses should be subject to this, because we know that there are various constraints around the technology we have for them. But again, if bus replacements are going to be part of our future, we need to incorporate them into the network and our reporting schedule.
100%. We have talked about that, getting them into the RTI, for example, showing on the RTI, and then we'll have all that data. So that is the plan, right?
Yeah, through you, Chair. It will be discussed in a bit more detail in the workshop this afternoon, but that is the future.
Very good. Something to look forward to. Councillor Lenson? Sorry, you're not a councillor.
I got promoted. Do I get paid now? Why don't I get paid better?
You get paid something.
My question relates to item number 18 on page 130, which is the data cancellations by bus operator. And I'm just curious why Transurban is significantly higher than the others, and perhaps that's just because they're bigger, but then even accounting for that, it is a much higher rate at about 20 per day. And do you have any sort of insight whether that's consistently the same routes, or whether it's routes that are less frequent or anything like that? Because those 20 cancellations could be quite impactful depending on where they are.
Well, yes, we do know that they are clustered and they are impactful in a particular area. If you live in Orfeo Bay, for example, you will feel it.
And so the follow-up would be, what can we do about that?
Good question.
Great question, through you, Chair. So it's a combination of things. They do over 50%, just a little bit over 50% of our services, so they probably will always statistically stand out as having more issues. The way that they operate is that they structurally, Renee touched on a little bit, is that mixture of part-time, full-time, mix and matching of covering shifts and what have you. They've automotive technicians, diesel mechanics, and things like that, right, over time. So cancellations can occur because the vehicle doesn't work, or the human doesn't work, they're not there, and what have you. Then you struggle to get, or you ring round to get the replacements for whatever you need. So there's a number of things that occur in terms of on the day that impact that. They have a larger number of that occurring. It's more difficult for them to manage that. Renee talked about, I think she mentioned an additional 17 odd drivers, right? Which is that establishment number. And now you get into a philosophical debate is, that should that have been 22 instead of 17, and all that sort of argument. So there's a whole number of things that they need to continue to work at, would be a polite way of saying it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess is there anything that Metlink can do to? I suppose they're meeting their standards, right? So that you're quite limited in what can be done to improve that.
What we can do is take this into account when we do our new contracting, and we have had quite a few discussions about dealing with that. So cancellations on infrequent services, cancellations for first and last services, cancellations for on specific routes they could be things that we look at as conditions that you have to meet under a new contract. So two new questions have just slipped onto my list, but we'll try to keep it there so we can finish for a break for lunch before 1 o'clock. Councillor Duthie, Councillor Coopernand.
Thank you. Question about Te Hunga Whakaha total mobility, which is on page 12 of the attachment. There's a consistent trend there of increasing demand for that service year on year. There's 3 years of data there presented. Just could I have a bit of an explanation as to how the fares work for there? So it's attributed to reflective of the half price fares initiative, which is now permanent. I guess I don't really understand this area of our service very well. How does that fare system work? And are there any cost implications for us providing this service if we have a continued demand growth like this? Does this become more and more an imposition on our budget, or is it insignificant in the scheme of things, or is it all subsidised? How does it actually, that area work? Because it's not a familiarity of mine.
Good question. So essentially, it was 50%. What's the subsidy rate, Matthew? It's now 25, isn't it? So it's 25, 25, 50. Used to be 50-50, so it was 50% subsidised, and it was a combination of, I'm going to use the term private share, but I really hate using that term. So it was 50% part played by the customer and 50% subsidised, and that was a combination between Wakatahi and ourselves. As part of the Community Connect scheme, that was reduced to the private share of 25%, and that has been retained. I believe that's been retained, Matt. I'm looking at you there. Yeah, he's good. Okay, so it's been retained. So that's the payment. The private share, or essentially what the person pays, is 25% total fare. There's a variety of means they can pay. It's quite often by the Snapper card, and then 75%, 50% of that 75%, I think, is funded by central government, and 25% by us. So when you say if we see a steady growth in total mobility, does it come back as a budget? Yes, it does. So it's now only 25% of the total fare price, but 25% of that fare price does come back to this council. And I believe in the budget we have seen significant cost increases. I think it's to the tune of, I think it was about $1 to $2 million in the last 3 to 4 years. So that's 0.2, 0.3% of Metlink's total operating budget, but it's definitely not inconsequential. So that has been factored in, that continued growth, or a degree of continued growth has been factored in, but we'll be watching that very closely to make sure that this doesn't become an item that can potentially push our budget over. But yes, it will have an impact on Metlink's budget as it grows.
Perhaps to note that growth is not a bad thing necessarily. It's a good thing that people with mobility challenges are being able to facilitate to move around. It's just an interesting trend there to understand as part of our work.
Yeah. Has that review of the government's review of that program finished, or is it still ongoing? No, it's still ongoing. So it's taken a very long time. So there'll be more to say on that once that review is finished and we get the implications from that back to us. Okay, last question, Councillor Coopernand.
Thank you. With the fares income shortfall running at about $1 million a month. Are the cost-saving steps we're taking of sufficient size to make sure we end up with a balanced budget at the end of this year without the deficit that we had last year?
Yes. Tim might have some more to say.
Through the chair, we've got enough to balance the budget, and we will discuss this. Is it the 5th or the 4th of December? There's a specific cost savings discussion that will be had with council, and we will confirm the initiatives that we workshopped a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, that's right. So we haven't sort of discussed exactly what the OPEX savings will be under the annual plan program, but yeah, that will come. Okay, thanks team for another very good performance report, and that's us for the meeting. So I'll close this off with a karakia, and then we can have lunch. Me karakia tātou, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pauna mu te moana, kia tere te kārohirohi, I mua o I tō huarahi. Kia ora everyone. Lunch next door, and then back here at 1 o'clock, and we've got Matt from East by West coming, so be here at 1.